Ukrainian Prime Minister is busy fighting right now. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're the savior of the people. Here's my eyes.
You may have already seen that lovely emotional moment between a veteran and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the 80th D-Day anniversary ceremony in Normandy, France. Zelensky joined world leaders in reflecting on the past and the present. This anniversary again took place in the shadow, of course, of a war in Europe, with leaders echoing the message that democracy is still under threat today. Yuriy Sak is an advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries that is building up the country's defense industry inside. I spoke with him earlier about the recent decision to allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia by the United States and next weekend's peace summit, as well as his visit to Canada. Yuriy Sak, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rosemary. Good to be on your program.
Well, good to have you in Canada, and we'll talk about that in a moment, about what you're doing here. But I want to ask you about some of the latest developments, because they have been significant, particularly that decision by the U.S. To allow U.S. weapons to strike targets inside Russia. It's limited to defending Kharkiv, but tell me how significant that is in terms of the battle.
Rosemary, if you consider the intensity of the artillery shelling, the missile strikes, the drone strikes that come at the Ukrainian cities recently from the Russian territory, in particular in Kharkiv and Kharkiv region. Just in May, Ukraine was the target of almost 300 missiles, both ballistic and cruise missiles, almost 400 Shahed drones, the Iranian ones. And along the front lines, just in May, Russians have used almost 3,200 glide bombs. Now, these are particularly devastating because each one carries a payload of sometimes up to 2,000 kilograms, right? So the amount of devastation caused by these Russian troops is enormous. And of course, when we see the enemy just a couple of kilometers away from the border, and our hands are tied when we are not allowed to strike them where they are, where we can see them, this results in civilian deaths in our cities, in destruction of our infrastructure. More than 80% of our power generating infrastructure have been destroyed in recent months, and as a result, right now, the whole of Ukraine is going through regular power cuts, blackouts. So the situation is pretty bad in this respect, but at the same time, we have been able to stall the Russian advances, and of course the decision to allow Ukraine to use the Western weapons to strike Russia inside Russia, military objects of Russian army, that is a very important one.
President Putin obviously reacted to that, saying that it would mark a dangerous step and that Moscow would be providing long-range weapons to other countries to strike Western targets. Do you think that is a serious threat? Are you concerned about the idea that this will lead to escalation?
Rosemary, we shouldn't never dismiss what we hear from the Kremlin, but at the same time, this is what they were doing for more than 2 years now. They are trying to bank on fear. They are trying to scare Ukrainian partners into inaction. They are very well aware that we have been able to degrade their army considerably, and of course they understand that if they convince, in inverted commas, if they convince our partners to stop providing Ukraine with military support, the situation will be much more difficult. So it is difficult, and I don't want to speculate on what sort of weapons they will provide to who. But of course, we are seeing a formation of, if you like, a new axis of evil, right? We see that Russia partners with Iran, Russia partners with other rogue countries. So, but we don't have to be afraid, because, we have crossed the red lines drawn by the Kremlin so many times, and every time when we are brave enough to do that, we just achieve success and we degrade Russian army even further and bring peace closer. You
are in Canada to meet with, I think, Canadian IT companies to counter Russian propaganda, which is another part of this war as well. What kind of discussions are you having, and what is Canada's role on that front?
Well, first of all, I'd like to, by tradition, use this opportunity to thank the Canadian people, the Canadian government for supporting Ukraine. You know, Canada is one of the top 10 supporters of Ukraine when it comes to military, both lethal and non-lethal aid. For us, it's just vital to have partners like that. And yes, indeed, we have been meeting here with representatives of Canada's booming IT industry, and fighting propaganda on the global front is of course part of the success on the front lines as well. So there are certain projects that have been launched which will enable not just us Ukrainians, but all of those who are against tyrannies around the world. That will curb the propaganda, they will dispel the myths, they will fight these malign narratives that are spread by the Kremlin, which spends billions, literally billions of US dollars on spreading these false narratives. And I would also like to stress that, it's been more than 2 years now, this war, but we always say that we have not been just sitting idly and waiting for the Western military support to arrive. During just 2023, despite the missile attacks, despite the drone attacks, we have been able to pretty much build up our own defense industry. So we're now building, creating millions of drones. We are capable of, making our own ammunition, artillery pieces. So essentially the situation we're in right now, and this is another reason why we are here and why we travel around the world to speak to our partners, is this. So Ukrainian defense industry is now capable of producing weapons of different kinds for $20 billion US, but at the same time the Ukrainian government can only allocate $6 billion. So we have a gap. Now, to close that gap, our ministry has came up with this initiative which is called Zbroyari, Manufacturing Freedom. Zbroyari is a Ukrainian term for weapons manufacturers. Now, the goal of that project, this campaign, it's a global crowdfunding campaign, and I would like to thank the Canadian government for being one of the first 2 countries who actually have participated in this initiative, which means that our partners, instead of procuring these weapons for Ukraine somewhere else, they buy Ukrainian-made weapons for the Ukrainian army.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about next weekend when world leaders are going to gather in Switzerland for a peace summit. Our Prime Minister is going to be there. The President is not going, but he is sending the Vice President. What is the expectation from that meeting? What does Ukraine hope to see come out of it?
Rosemary, we've said it from day one of this large-scale invasion. We are a peace-loving nation. We never wanted this war. We never provoked it. So, of course, we spend a lot of time trying to find a way to bring this war to an end. We understand that a lot will depend on the situation on the front lines, and defeating Russia militarily is part of the success. But the peace summit, we hope, will also solidify the international community of free and democratic nations in our common vision of what just peace for Ukraine will mean. And of course this means the removal of Russian troops from the Ukrainian territories. This means the restoration of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. This means bringing back over 20,000 kidnapped Ukrainian children. This means the return of prisoners of war. So there are many, many things on the agenda of that peace summit, and it is very important, that there will be a high level of representation, and we hope that it will bring us one step closer to our victory and one step closer to stability in Europe and the world.
Yuriy Sak, thank you for making the time. Appreciate seeing you. Appreciate seeing you in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you.